The morning sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured grounds of Windsor Castle as 8-year-old Prince George walked quietly beside his nanny. His small hands were clasped behind his back, a habit he had picked up from watching his father during official ceremonies. The young prince had always been different from other children his age, not because of his royal status, but because of something deeper that seemed to shine from within him. Sarah Mitchell had been working as a security guard at Windsor Castle for 15 years. She had seen countless royal family members come and go, witnessed grand ceremonies, and protected some of the most important people in the world. But nothing had prepared her for the daily encounters with the youngest member of the royal family, who seemed to see straight into people's souls. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Prince George would take his educational walks around the castle grounds. These weren't just casual strolls, but carefully planned learning experiences, where he would observe the historical architecture, learn about the castle's heritage, and interact with the staff who kept the royal residence running smoothly. Sarah always positioned herself near the East Wing entrance during these walks. It was her assigned post, but over the months she had begun to look forward to these brief moments when the young prince would pass by. There was something about his gentle demeanor that reminded her of her own grandson, whom she hadn't seen in over 2 years. The trouble had started in Sarah's personal life long before Prince George ever noticed her. Her daughter Emma had made some poor choices, gotten involved with the wrong crowd, and eventually cut off all contact with her family. Sarah's ex-husband blamed her for their daughter's problems, claiming that her demanding work schedule had driven Emma away. The accusations stung because deep down Sarah wondered if there was truth to them. Working at the castle had become both a blessing and a curse. The job paid well and gave her purpose, but the long hours and strict security protocols meant she rarely had time for personal relationships. She had thrown herself into her work, becoming one of the most reliable guards on the team, but inside she felt increasingly hollow and disconnected from the world outside the castle walls. On this particular morning, as Prince George approached her post with his nanny, something was different. The young prince slowed his pace as he neared Sarah's position. His clear blue eyes met hers, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Without saying a word, he offered her a small, genuine smile that seemed to acknowledge something she hadn't even realized was visible on her face. Sarah felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. It wasn't the first time the prince had acknowledged her presence, but today his look seemed to penetrate deeper, as if he could see the loneliness she carried like a heavy cloak. She managed a professional nod in return, but her hands were trembling slightly as she gripped her radio. The prince's nanny gently guided him forward, but George turned back once more to look at Sarah. In that brief glance, she saw something that reminded her of her grandson's eyes the last time she had seen him, full of innocence and unconditional acceptance. The memory hit her like a physical blow, and she had to focus on her breathing to maintain her composure. After they passed, Sarah found herself thinking about that moment for the rest of her shift. There had been no words exchanged, no grand gesture, just a simple human connection that somehow managed to crack open the protective shell she had built around her heart. She couldn't understand why a child's smile could affect her so profoundly, but she felt something shifting inside her that she hadn't experienced in years. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment staring at her phone. Emma's number was still there, unchanged after all this time. She had deleted and re-added it dozens of times, never quite able to take the final step of either calling or permanently removing it. The image of Prince George's compassionate eyes kept returning to her mind, and she wondered what it meant that a child could show such depth of understanding without uttering a single word. The young prince, meanwhile, returned to his private quarters with an unusual quietness that his nanny noticed immediately. When asked about his walk, George simply said that he had seen someone who looked very sad and that he hoped she would feel better soon. His innocent observation revealed a maturity and emotional intelligence that often surprised the adults around him. As the days passed, Sarah found herself paying closer attention to Prince George during his walks. She began to notice how he interacted with other staff members, always with the same gentle respect and genuine interest in their well-being. He would nod to the gardeners, smile at the cleaning staff, and acknowledge everyone from the highest-ranking officials to the newest employees with equal warmth. The young prince had an extraordinary gift for making people feel seen and valued, something that seemed to come naturally to him despite his young age. His parents had taught him about duty and service, but this quality appeared to be innate, as if he understood instinctively that true leadership meant caring for others before yourself. Sarah realized that in all her years of service, she had become increasingly isolated from the very people she was meant to protect and serve alongside. The castle's formal atmosphere and strict protocols had gradually eroded her ability to connect with others on a human level. Watching Prince George navigate these same protocols while maintaining his humanity was both inspiring and humbling. The young prince's presence began to have a ripple effect throughout the castle staff. People started paying more attention to each other, offering small kindnesses and genuine greetings that had been absent for far too long. It was as if his example was quietly teaching everyone around him about the importance of seeing each other as human beings rather than just colleagues or subordinates. Sarah found herself wondering if she had lost sight of what truly mattered in her pursuit of professional excellence and personal protection from further heartbreak. The walls she had built to keep pain out had also kept love and connection from finding their way in. The following week brought an unexpected change to the castle routine. Prince George's regular walks were temporarily suspended due to increased security concerns related to a visiting foreign dignitary. Sarah found herself missing those brief moments of connection more than she had anticipated. The absence of the young prince's presence seemed to cast a shadow over the entire East Wing, and she wasn't the only staff member who noticed the difference. During the 3-day suspension, Sarah had time to reflect on how significantly those small encounters had begun to affect her daily outlook. She realized that she had started looking forward to work in a way she hadn't for years, not because of the job itself, but because of the hope that she might catch a glimpse of genuine human kindness in the prince's eyes. On the 4th day, when the walks resumed, something extraordinary happened. As Prince George approached Sarah's post, he did something he had never done before. He stopped walking entirely and looked directly at her for several long seconds. His nanny, Mrs. Henderson, seemed surprised by the sudden halt, but allowed the moment to unfold naturally. The young prince then reached into his small jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Without breaking eye contact with Sarah, he handed the paper to Mrs. Henderson and whispered something too quiet for Sarah to hear. Mrs. Henderson nodded and approached Sarah's post with a gentle smile. "Excuse me," Mrs. Henderson said softly. "Prince George wanted me to give this to you. He drew it himself during his art lesson yesterday." She handed Sarah the folded paper and stepped back, allowing the prince to observe Sarah's reaction from a respectful distance. Sarah's hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. Inside was a simple but beautifully drawn picture of a woman in a security uniform, standing next to a rainbow. At the bottom, in careful child's handwriting, were the words, "For the nice lady who looks sad. I hope this makes you smile." The impact of this simple gesture was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, and for a moment, she forgot entirely about protocol and professionalism. She looked up at Prince George, who was watching her with concern and hope in his expression. Unable to trust her voice, she simply pressed the drawing to her chest and nodded, hoping he would understand her gratitude. Prince George's face broke into a radiant smile, and he gave her a small wave before continuing on his walk. Mrs. Henderson lingered for a moment and whispered to Sarah, "He's been asking about you every day. He has a gift for noticing when people are hurting." With that, she hurried to catch up with her young charge. Sarah spent the rest of her shift in a state of emotional turmoil. The drawing represented something she had almost forgotten existed: unconditional kindness from another human being. No one had shown her such pure, unselfish concern in longer than she could remember. The fact that it came from a child who barely knew her made it all the more powerful. That evening, Sarah carefully placed the drawing on her refrigerator, where it immediately transformed the sterile feeling of her kitchen. She found herself staring at it during dinner, marveling at how such a simple act could penetrate years of emotional armor. The rainbow in the drawing seemed to represent hope, something she had given up on long ago. The young prince, unaware of the profound impact his gesture had made, continued his routine with the same gentle attention to everyone around him. During his next art lesson, he asked his instructor if he could draw more pictures for the castle staff who looked like they might need cheering up. His teacher, moved by his compassion, encouraged this project and helped him create a small collection of uplifting drawings. Prince George's parents had always emphasized the importance of service and caring for others, But they were amazed by how naturally their son applied these lessons. His father, Prince William, had noticed the positive changes in staff morale and eventually learned about his son's small acts of kindness. Rather than discouraging these interactions, he praised George for his thoughtfulness while reminding him about appropriate boundaries. Back in her apartment, Sarah found herself thinking about her estranged daughter Emma more frequently. The drawing on her refrigerator served as a daily reminder that healing was possible and that sometimes the smallest gestures could create the biggest changes. She began to wonder if her pride and fear of rejection had prevented her from making the first move toward reconciliation. The following week, Prince George surprised Sarah again by bringing her a small potted plant during one of his walks. This time he spoke directly to her for the first time. "Mrs. Henderson says plants make people happy," he said in his clear, young voice. "I thought you might like this one because it has strong roots just like you." Sarah was so moved by his words that she had to blink back tears. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness," she managed to say. "It's beautiful and I'll take very good care of it." Prince George beamed at her response. "You don't have to call me that when it's just us," he said with innocent honesty. "George is fine. My friends call me George." The simple offer of friendship from this remarkable child broke something open in Sarah's chest. She realized that she had been so focused on maintaining professional distance that she had forgotten how to accept genuine human connection. "Thank you, George," she said softly. "I would be honored to be your friend." From that day forward, their brief encounters during his walks became small bright spots in both of their days. George would always acknowledge Sarah with a smile or a wave, and sometimes he would stop to ask how her plant was doing or share something interesting he had learned during his lessons. These interactions began to change Sarah in ways she hadn't expected. She found herself smiling more often, even when George wasn't around. She started paying attention to her appearance again, not out of vanity, but because she felt worthy of care and attention for the first time in years. The other castle staff began to notice the change in Sarah's demeanor. She became more approachable, more willing to engage in casual conversation during breaks, and generally seemed lighter somehow. Her transformation inspired others to examine their own relationships and consider whether they had also become too isolated in their professional roles. Prince George's influence was spreading throughout the castle in ways that none of the adults fully understood. His simple philosophy of treating everyone with kindness and respect was creating a ripple effect that touched lives far beyond his immediate interactions. Several weeks passed, and the friendship between Prince George and Sarah continued to develop in small, meaningful ways. The young prince had taken to bringing Sarah little gifts during his walks, nothing elaborate or expensive, just thoughtful tokens that showed he was thinking of her well-being. Sometimes it was a flower from the castle gardens, other times a bookmark he had made during his craft time, or simply a cheerful greeting card with a message written in his careful handwriting. Sarah began to look forward to these encounters with an enthusiasm that surprised her. She found herself arriving at work earlier than necessary, making sure her uniform was perfectly pressed and that she looked her best for their brief meetings. The plant George had given her now sat prominently on her desk in the security office, thriving under her careful attention and serving as a constant reminder of his kindness. One particularly rainy Thursday morning, Prince George arrived at Sarah's post looking unusually subdued. His usual bright smile was missing, and there was a heaviness in his young shoulders that immediately caught Sarah's attention. When he approached her position, instead of his typical cheerful greeting, he simply stood quietly looking up at her with troubled eyes. "Is everything all right, George?" Sarah asked gently, momentarily forgetting about protocol as her maternal instincts kicked in. The concern in her voice was genuine and warm, the kind of tone she hadn't used with another person in years. The young prince looked around to make sure they weren't being overheard, then stepped closer to Sarah's post. "My great-grandmother isn't feeling well," he whispered, his voice heavy with worry. "Everyone keeps saying she'll be fine, but I can tell they're scared. I don't know how to help her." Sarah's heart ached for the child. Despite his royal status and privileged upbringing, he was still just a little boy dealing with the universal fear of losing someone he loved. She knelt down to bring herself closer to his eye level, something that would normally be completely against protocol. But in this moment, Nothing mattered except comforting this worried child. Sometimes the best way to help someone who's sick is just to love them and let them know you care, Sarah said softly. Even when we can't fix everything, showing people that we're thinking of them can make them feel stronger. Have you told your great-grandmother how much you love her lately? George nodded thoughtfully. I visit her every day after my lessons. I read to her and tell her about what I learned. She always smiles when I do that. Then you're already helping her more than you know, Sarah assured him. Love is the most powerful medicine there is, and you have so much love to give. She's lucky to have a great-grandson who cares about her so much. The young prince's face brightened slightly at Sarah's words. Thank you for talking to me about it. The grown-ups always change the subject when I ask questions about great-grandmother. I think they're trying to protect me, but it makes me worry more. Sarah understood completely. Adults sometimes forget that children are stronger than they think, and that not knowing the truth can be scarier than facing it honestly. You're very brave, George, and very wise for someone so young. Mrs. Henderson had been waiting patiently nearby during this exchange, and Sarah could see approval in the older woman's eyes. It was clear that George's nanny recognized the value of allowing him to have genuine conversations with the people around him, even if it meant bending the usual rules slightly. As they prepared to continue their walk, George reached into his pocket and pulled out a small hand-carved wooden figurine of a dog. I made this in woodworking class, he said, placing it carefully in Sarah's hand. It's not very good, but I wanted you to have it because you listened to me like a real friend would. Sarah was deeply moved by the gift and the sentiment behind it. The little wooden dog was indeed roughly carved, with uneven edges and a slightly lopsided appearance, but it was clearly made with love and care. It's perfect, George, she said sincerely. I'll treasure it always. After the prince and his nanny continued on their walk, Sarah found herself thinking about their conversation throughout the rest of her shift. The trust George had shown in confiding his worries to her was both touching and humbling. She realized that despite their vast differences in age and status, they had formed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and caring. That evening, Sarah placed the wooden dog next to the plant on her desk, creating a small shrine to the kindness she had received. Looking at these simple gifts, she felt a profound shift happening within herself. The walls she had built around her heart were crumbling, and for the first time in years, she was allowing herself to truly care about another person without fear of being hurt. The next morning brought unexpected news. Sarah's supervisor informed her that the Queen's health had taken a turn for the worse, and the entire royal family was gathering at Windsor Castle. Security protocols were being heightened, and all staff were asked to be extra vigilant and respectful during this difficult time. Sarah's thoughts immediately went to Prince George and how he must be feeling. She knew that losing a great-grandmother would be devastating for any child, but for George, who had such a close relationship with the Queen, it would be especially heartbreaking. She found herself wishing there was something she could do to comfort him during this difficult time. Throughout the day, Sarah noticed an unusual quiet settling over the castle. Staff members spoke in hushed tones, and there was a palpable sense of sadness in the air. The young prince's regular walk was cancelled, and Sarah found herself missing their planned encounter more than she would have thought possible. 2 days later, when George finally resumed his walks, the change in him was immediately apparent. His usual bright energy was subdued, and though he still managed to smile at Sarah, there was a sadness in his eyes that broke her heart. When he reached her post, he didn't stop to talk as he usually did, but simply gave her a small wave and continued walking. Sarah wanted desperately to comfort him, but she knew that this was neither the time nor the place for their usual friendly conversation. Instead, she simply nodded respectfully and watched as he passed by, her heart heavy with empathy for his loss. That afternoon, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. She went to the castle gift shop and purchased a sympathy card, something simple and appropriate. Inside, she wrote a brief message. Dear George, I'm thinking of you during this sad time. Your great-grandmother was lucky to have someone who loved her as much as you did. Your friend, Sarah. She gave the card to Mrs. Henderson the next day with a request that it be passed along to the prince when the time felt right. The nanny accepted the card with understanding, recognizing the genuine care behind Sarah's gesture. 3 weeks after the Queen's passing, life at Windsor Castle was slowly returning to its normal rhythm, though a respectful solemnity still lingered in the corridors. Prince George had been absent from his regular walks for nearly a week as the royal family navigated their grief and the complex arrangements that followed such a significant loss. When George finally returned to his routine, Sarah was struck by how much the young prince seemed to have matured in just a few short weeks. There was a new depth in his eyes, a quiet understanding of life's fragility that no 8-year-old should have to carry. Yet somehow his essential kindness remained intact, perhaps even strengthened by his experience with loss. On his first walk back, George made a point of stopping at Sarah's post. He looked up at her with those wise, sad eyes and said simply, "Thank you for the card. It meant a lot to me." His voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the emotion beneath his composed words. "I'm sorry for your loss, George," Sarah replied gently. "Your great-grandmother was an extraordinary woman, and I know how much you loved her." George nodded thoughtfully. "She taught me that when people we love die, the best way to honor them is to keep being kind to others just like they were kind to us. She said that love doesn't end when someone goes away. It just changes into a different kind of love that we carry in our hearts forever." The wisdom in his words left Sarah momentarily speechless. Here was a child who had just experienced one of life's most difficult lessons, yet he was already finding ways to transform his grief into something positive and meaningful. His resilience and grace under such circumstances was both inspiring and humbling. "That's a beautiful way to think about it," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "She sounds like she was a wonderful teacher." "She was," George agreed with a small smile. "And now I want to be like her. I want to help people feel less sad, especially the people who work here at the castle. Great-grandmother always said that the people who take care of us deserve to be taken care of too." Over the following days, Sarah watched as Prince George seemed to make a conscious effort to spread comfort and kindness throughout the castle. He began stopping to chat with more staff members during his walks, always with a gentle word or a small gesture of appreciation. His interactions weren't just polite formalities, but genuine attempts to connect with and uplift the people around him. Sarah noticed that George paid particular attention to the older staff members, perhaps recognizing in them a reminder of his beloved great-grandmother. He would ask the elderly cleaning lady about her grandchildren, compliment the head gardener on the beautiful flowers, and always remember to thank the kitchen staff for preparing his meals. The young prince's behavior began to have a noticeable effect on the entire castle community. Staff members who had worked alongside each other for years but rarely spoke beyond professional necessities began to engage in more personal conversations. The atmosphere became warmer, more collegial, as if George's example was teaching everyone that they were all part of a larger family. During one of their conversations, George shared with Sarah that he had been having trouble sleeping since his great-grandmother's death. "I keep thinking about all the people in the world who might be sad or lonely," he told her. "I wish I could help all of them, but I don't know how." Sarah recognized the weight of empathy that George was carrying, a burden that was perhaps too heavy for such young shoulders. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "sometimes when we try to help everyone at once, we end up helping no one very well. But when we focus on helping the people right in front of us, one person at a time, that kindness spreads out like ripples in a pond." George considered this advice carefully. "So if I help one person feel better, they might help someone else feel better too." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "That's how kindness works. It's contagious in the best possible way." This conversation seemed to give George a sense of purpose and direction for his grief. He began to approach his acts of kindness with renewed focus, understanding that even small gestures could have far-reaching effects. His friendship with Sarah deepened as she became both a recipient of his kindness and a trusted advisor who helped him process his feelings. Sarah, meanwhile, was experiencing her own transformation. George's influence had awakened something in her that had been dormant for years. She found herself thinking more about her estranged daughter Emma, wondering if the lessons she was learning from an 8-year-old prince might apply to her own family situation. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during one of George's visits. He had been telling Sarah about a project his teacher had assigned, where each student had to write about someone who had influenced their life. "I'm writing about you," he said with his characteristic directness. Sarah was stunned. "About me? George, surely there are much more important people in your life to write about." "But you taught me something really important," George insisted. "You taught me that it's okay to be sad sometimes, and that talking about sad feelings with someone who cares makes them less scary. Before I met you, I thought I always had to be happy because that's what princes are supposed to be. But you showed me that real friends care about each other even when they're not happy." His words hit Sarah like a revelation. She realized that in trying to comfort George, she had inadvertently learned something crucial about herself. She had spent years avoiding her own difficult emotions, pushing away anyone who might see her vulnerability. But George had shown her that true connection required authentic emotion, even when that emotion was painful. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment staring at her phone, Emma's number glowing on the screen. For the first time in 2 years, she felt ready to make the call. George's courage in facing his grief head-on had inspired her to find her own courage in facing her failures as a mother. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Hello." "Emma," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's your mother. I know it's been a long time and I know I've made mistakes, but I was hoping we could talk." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Sarah held her breath, preparing herself for rejection. But when Emma finally spoke, her voice was soft and cautious rather than angry. "I've been hoping you would call," she said quietly. "I've missed you, Mum." The conversation that followed was difficult and emotional, filled with tears and apologies from both sides. But it was also healing in a way that Sarah had never thought possible. They talked for over an hour, sharing their hurt and their hopes, slowly beginning to rebuild the bridge that had been burned by pride and misunderstanding. The weeks following Sarah's phone call with Emma brought a whirlwind of emotions and changes that she could never have anticipated. Their conversation had opened a door that had been locked for far too long, and both mother and daughter were tentatively stepping through it, learning to trust each other again. Emma agreed to meet Sarah for coffee the following weekend, neutral territory that felt safe for both of them. When Sarah saw her daughter walking toward the small cafe they had chosen, she was struck by how much Emma had changed. Gone was the angry, rebellious young woman who had stormed out of her life 2 years ago. In her place was a mature, thoughtful person who carried herself with quiet confidence. Their reunion was awkward at first, filled with careful words and tentative smiles. But as they began to share what had happened in their lives during their separation, the old warmth between them slowly began to resurface. Emma had gotten clean, found steady work, and was even in a healthy relationship. She had grown and healed in ways that Sarah had never dared to hope for. "I kept wanting to call you," Emma admitted over their second cup of coffee, "but I was so ashamed of the things I had said, the way I had hurt you. I thought you would never forgive me." "I was scared too," Sarah confessed. "I thought I had failed you as a mother, that everything that went wrong was my fault. I didn't know how to fix it, so I just gave up." They both cried then, mourning the lost time and the pain they had caused each other. But there was also relief in finally being honest about their feelings, in acknowledging their mistakes without letting them define their future. Meanwhile, at the castle, Prince George continued his walks with the same gentle attention to those around him. He had noticed that Sarah seemed different lately, lighter somehow, and he was curious about the change. During one of their conversations, she shared with him that she had reconnected with her daughter, carefully explaining the situation in terms that an 8-year-old could understand. "I'm so happy for you," George said with genuine joy. "It must feel wonderful to have your family back together." "It does," Sarah agreed. "And I have you to thank for it, at least partly. Watching how brave you were when you were sad about your great-grandmother showed me that I could be brave about my own sad feelings too." George beamed at this revelation. Great-grandmother always said that when we help each other, we end up helping ourselves too. I think she would be proud of both of us. Their friendship had evolved into something truly special, a bond that transcended their different ages and stations in life. George found in Sarah a trusted adult who listened to his concerns without dismissing them as childish worries. Sarah found in George a reminder of the pure, uncomplicated love that she had thought was lost forever. As spring turned to summer, Sarah's relationship with Emma continued to strengthen. They began meeting regularly, sometimes for meals, sometimes just for walks in the park. Emma even expressed interest in visiting the castle, curious to meet the young prince who had played such an important role in bringing her mother back to life. Sarah's transformation was noticed by everyone at the castle. Her colleagues remarked on her improved mood and increased engagement with the team. Her supervisor noted her renewed dedication to her work and her positive influence on staff morale. But most importantly, Sarah herself felt more alive and present than she had in years. One afternoon, during a particularly meaningful conversation with George, he said something that stopped Sarah in her tracks. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I think great-grandmother would have really liked you. She always said that the best people are the ones who learn from their mistakes and use them to help others." The comment struck Sarah deeply because she realized that George was right. Her experience with loss and reconciliation had given her a deeper understanding of human pain and the healing power of forgiveness. She found herself reaching out to other staff members who seemed isolated or troubled, offering the same kind of compassionate listening that George had shown her. This shift in Sarah's role within the castle community didn't go unnoticed. She began to be seen as a mentor and confidant by younger staff members who were struggling with their own personal challenges. Her willingness to share her own story of redemption gave others hope that their situations could also improve. The ripple effect of George's initial kindness was spreading further than either of them could have imagined. Sarah's renewed connection with her daughter had inspired Emma to reach out to her own estranged father, beginning a slow process of healing their fractured family. Emma's transformation had a positive impact on her relationship and her work, inspiring her colleagues with her dedication and positive attitude. George, observing all of these changes, began to understand something profound about the nature of kindness and human connection. His great-grandmother's lessons about service and compassion were coming to life in ways that went far beyond royal duty or public ceremony. He was seeing firsthand how genuine care for others could create waves of positive change that touched lives in unexpected ways. During one of their conversations, Sarah shared with George that she had been thinking about making a career change. Her work at the castle would always be special to her because of their friendship, but she was beginning to feel called toward something that would allow her to help people more directly. "What kind of work would you want to do?" George asked with interest. "I've been thinking about counseling or social work," Sarah replied, "working with families who are having trouble, maybe helping other parents who have lost touch with their children. I think my experiences have taught me something valuable that I could share with others." George's face lit up with excitement. "That sounds perfect for you. You're so good at making people feel better when they're sad. You could help so many families become happy again." The idea had been growing in Sarah's mind for weeks, but hearing George's enthusiastic support gave her the confidence to seriously consider making such a significant change. At 45, returning to school and starting a new career would be challenging, but for the first time in years she felt excited about the future, rather than merely enduring the present. That evening, Sarah called Emma to discuss her ideas about changing careers. Her daughter was immediately supportive, offering to help research programs and even suggesting that they could support each other through the challenges of pursuing new goals. "I'm proud of you, Mum," Emma said. "It takes courage to start over, but if anyone can do it, you can. And think of all the families you could help by sharing what you've learned." As Sarah hung up the phone that night, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought her to this point. A young prince's simple acts of kindness had set in motion a series of changes that were transforming not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. As autumn approached, Sarah found herself at a crossroads that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. Her life had been transformed so completely by her friendship with Prince George that she barely recognized the isolated, bitter woman she had been. The decision to leave her position at Windsor Castle and pursue a career in family counseling was becoming clearer each day, but it would mean saying goodbye to the young prince who had changed her life. The application process for the counseling program had been both challenging and healing. Writing her personal statement had forced Sarah to reflect deeply on her journey from despair to hope, from isolation to connection. She found herself drawing heavily on the lessons she had learned from George about the power of simple kindness and authentic human connection. During one of their regular conversations, Sarah finally worked up the courage to tell George about her plans. She had been dreading this moment, knowing how much their friendship meant to both of them, but also knowing that this was the right path forward. "George," she began carefully during one of his afternoon walks, "I have something important to tell you. I've been accepted into a program to become a family counselor, which means I'll be leaving my job here at the castle." The young prince's face showed a mix of emotions, pride and sadness competing for dominance. "That's wonderful news," he said, though his voice was quieter than usual. "You'll be amazing at helping families, but I'll miss talking with you every day." "I'll miss you too," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, "more than you know. But I want you to understand that this decision is partly because of what you taught me. You showed me that I could open my heart again, that I could trust people and let them care about me. Without your friendship, I never would have found the courage to reconnect with Emma or to pursue this dream." George was quiet for a long moment, processing what Sarah had told him. When he finally spoke, his words showed the remarkable wisdom that continued to surprise the adults in his life. "Great-grandmother used to say that the best teachers are the ones who help their students become strong enough to go out and teach others. I think that's what happened with us. You learned to be happy again, and now you can help other people learn the same thing." His mature response both touched and amazed Sarah. "When did you become so wise?" she asked with a mixture of admiration and affection. "I think I learned it from watching you," George replied honestly. "You showed me that grown-ups can change and get better, even when they've been sad for a long time. That's a very important thing for a kid to know." Over the following weeks, as Sarah prepared for her departure, their conversations took on a different quality. There was an urgency to share important thoughts and feelings, knowing that their daily interactions would soon come to an end. George began bringing Sarah small mementos from his lessons and activities, creating a collection of memories that she could take with her into her new life. Sarah, in turn, wanted to give George something special to remember their friendship. She spent several evenings working on a scrapbook that documented their time together, filled with copies of the drawings he had given her, photographs from castle events where they appeared in the background, and her own written reflections on what their friendship had meant to her. When she presented the scrapbook to George during her final week at the castle, his reaction was everything she had hoped for. He carefully turned each page, studying the images and reading her heartfelt words with the serious attention that she had come to associate with his character. "This is the most special gift anyone has ever given me," he said solemnly. "I'll keep it forever, and when I'm older, I'll remember everything you taught me about being a good friend." The news of Sarah's departure had spread throughout the castle staff, and many of her colleagues expressed surprise at her decision to leave such a secure and prestigious position. But those who had worked closely with her could see the positive changes in her life and understood that she was moving toward something important, rather than running away from her responsibilities. Mrs. Henderson, George's nanny, approached Sarah privately during her last week to express her gratitude for the positive influence she had had on the young prince. "You've helped him understand that real relationships require vulnerability and authentic emotion," she explained. "That's a lesson that will serve him well throughout his life, especially in his future role as a leader." Sarah was humbled by this perspective. She had never thought of her friendship with George as preparing him for his royal duties, but she could see how learning to connect genuinely with people from all walks of life would indeed be valuable for his future. On her final day at the castle, Sarah was surprised to learn that Prince George had requested a special farewell gathering with some of the staff members who had become important to him over the years. The small ceremony took place in one of the castle's private gardens, with about 20 people in attendance. George stood before the group with a composure that belied his young age and spoke about the importance of the relationships he had formed with the castle staff. He specifically mentioned Sarah's friendship and how it had taught him about courage, forgiveness, and the healing power of human connection. "Sarah is leaving us to help other families find their way back to each other," he announced to the gathered group. "She learned how to do this by first finding her way back to her own family, and I'm proud to have been her friend during that journey." The young prince then presented Sarah with a letter written in his careful handwriting, sealed in an envelope marked "For Sarah from your friend George." He asked her not to open it until she started her new classes, explaining that it contained his wishes for her future success. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, George approached Sarah for their final private conversation. The emotion of the moment was overwhelming for both of them, but they managed to express their gratitude for the unexpected friendship that had changed both of their lives. "You'll always be special to me," George said, giving Sarah a hug that was both innocent and profound. "And I know you're going to help so many people because you have the biggest, kindest heart of anyone I know." Sarah held back tears as she returned his embrace. "And you, George, are going to grow up to be an extraordinary man who makes the world a better place just by being in it. Your great-grandmother would be so proud of the person you're becoming." As Sarah walked away from Windsor Castle for the last time as an employee, she carried with her not just her personal belongings and memories, but a transformed understanding of herself and her place in the world. The scared, isolated woman who had hidden behind professional protocols was gone, replaced by someone who understood the profound impact that genuine human connection could have on individual lives and entire communities. The young prince watched from his window as Sarah's car disappeared down the long driveway, knowing that while their daily interactions were ending, the influence they had had on each other would continue to shape their lives for years to come. 2 years had passed since Sarah left Windsor Castle to begin her new career as a family counselor, and the transformation in her life continued to unfold in ways she had never imagined possible. The counseling program had been challenging but deeply rewarding, and she had graduated with honors, her personal experience of family reconciliation informing her academic studies in profound ways. Sarah now worked at a community center in a modest neighborhood outside London, specializing in helping families navigate the difficult process of rebuilding relationships after periods of estrangement. Her office walls were decorated with thank you cards from families she had helped, photos of her reunited family, and prominently displayed in the center, the small wooden dog that Prince George had carved for her years ago. Every morning, Sarah would open the letter that George had given her on her last day at the castle. She had read it hundreds of times, but the words still gave her strength and purpose. "Dear Sarah, thank you for teaching me that the best way to help people is to see them with your heart, not just your eyes. You showed me that everyone has a story that makes them who they are, and that when we listen to those stories with kindness, we can help people write better endings. I hope you help lots of families find their way back to love. Your friend always, George." The letter had become her daily inspiration, reminding her of the simple wisdom that an 8-year-old prince had shared about the power of compassionate listening and authentic connection. Sarah's relationship with Emma had continued to flourish, and they had become not just mother and daughter again, but genuine friends who supported each other through life's challenges. Emma had even started volunteering at Sarah's community center, using her own experience of addiction and recovery to help other young people who were struggling with similar issues. The ripple effect of Prince George's initial kindness had spread far beyond what either of them could have anticipated. Sarah's work was helping dozens of families each year reconnect and heal, and each of those families went on to impact their own communities in positive ways. Emma's volunteer work was touching the lives of troubled teenagers who might otherwise have continued down destructive paths. Meanwhile, Prince George had continued to grow into the remarkable young man that Sarah had always known he would become. Now 10 years old, he approached his royal duties with the same gentle wisdom and genuine care for others that had characterized his friendship with Sarah. His tutors and family members often remarked on his unusual ability to connect with people from all backgrounds and his instinctive understanding of how to make others feel valued and heard. The young prince had never forgotten the lessons he learned from his friendship with Sarah about the importance of authentic human connection. He continued to make time for meaningful interactions with the castle staff, and his influence had created a culture of mutual respect and kindness throughout the royal household that was noticed by visitors and dignitaries from around the world. On the 2nd anniversary of Sarah's departure from the castle, she received an unexpected phone call from Mrs. Henderson, George's former nanny who had since been promoted to a senior position in the royal household. "Sarah," Mrs. Henderson said warmly, "I'm calling because Prince George has a special request. He's been working on a project about people who have made a difference in his life, and he would very much like to see you again. Would you be available to visit the castle next week?" Sarah was both thrilled and nervous at the prospect of seeing George again. She wondered how much he had changed, whether their special connection would still exist, and what it would feel like to return to the place where her transformation had begun. The reunion took place in the same garden where their farewell ceremony had been held 2 years earlier. When Prince George walked into the garden, Sarah was struck by how much he had grown. He was taller, more confident in his bearing, but his eyes still held the same gentle wisdom and genuine warmth that she remembered. "Sarah," he exclaimed, running toward her with the unguarded enthusiasm of a child, momentarily forgetting royal protocol in his excitement. "I've missed you so much. I have so many things to tell you about." They spent the afternoon walking through the castle grounds, catching up on each other's lives. George was fascinated by Sarah's work and asked thoughtful questions about how she helped families reconnect. He shared stories about his own growth and learning, including his involvement in several charitable projects that focused on helping disadvantaged children and families. "I think about the things you taught me every day," George told her as they sat by the fountain where she used to stand guard. "Especially about listening to people's stories and seeing them with your heart. It helps me understand what people really need, not just what they're asking for." Sarah was amazed by the depth of his insight and the way he had integrated their childhood conversations into his developing philosophy of leadership and service. "You've grown into such a wise and compassionate young man," she told him. "Your great-grandmother would be incredibly proud of you." During their visit, George presented Sarah with a special surprise, a scholarship fund that he had convinced his parents to establish in her honor. The fund would provide financial assistance to families seeking counseling services, ensuring that financial barriers wouldn't prevent people from getting the help they needed to rebuild their relationships. "I wanted to find a way to help your work reach even more families," George explained. "Great-grandmother always said that when we have the ability to help others, we have the responsibility to do so." This seemed like something she would approve of. Sarah was overwhelmed by the generosity and thoughtfulness of the gesture. The scholarship fund would allow her to help families who couldn't otherwise afford counseling services, expanding her impact in ways she had never thought possible. As their visit drew to a close, both Sarah and George reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. A chance encounter between a lonely security guard and a compassionate young prince had set in motion a series of changes that had transformed multiple lives and would continue to impact families for generations to come. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if we had never met?" Sarah asked as they prepared to say goodbye. George considered the question seriously. "I think we were meant to meet," he said with the certainty that only children possess. "Great-grandmother used to say that sometimes the most important people in our lives come to us in unexpected ways, disguised as ordinary encounters. But really, they're angels sent to teach us what we need to know." As Sarah drove away from Windsor Castle that day, she carried with her not only wonderful memories of their reunion, but also a renewed sense of purpose and possibility. The shy, heartbroken woman who had once hidden behind professional barriers was now confident, connected, and committed to using her experiences to help others find their way back to love and family. The young prince watched from his window as her car disappeared, knowing that while their paths might not cross regularly, the bond they had formed and the lessons they had shared would continue to influence both of their lives forever. His simple acts of childhood kindness had grown into something far greater than either of them had imagined, proving that sometimes the smallest gestures can create the most profound transformations. Years later, when Prince George became a leader on the world stage, he would often credit his understanding of genuine human connection to the friendship he had formed with a castle security guard who taught him that everyone deserves to be seen, heard, and valued. And Sarah would continue her work, helping families heal and reconnect, carrying forward the wisdom that a wise young prince had shared about the transformative power of approaching others with an open heart and genuine compassion.